If this is your first exposure to HTML, people tend to think that it's supposed to provide instructions for how the content should look. After all, websites tend to look very nice, they look pretty, but actually HTML is meant to provide meaning and structure. So these are the two elements that HTML is meant for. Which means when you mark up content, when you apply these HTML tags, you're supposed to choose an HTML element that provides the most meaningful description to the content at hand. And that's what we refer to, a very important concept that we call semantic markup. So what is the idea behind semantic markup? It's basically providing structure to your document so that when someone glances over them, they can very quickly figure out the hierarchy of importance and the broad meaning of the content. So take a look at this document here. We have filing requirements as the main heading. We see here when and where should you file, and we see some other subheadings. So quickly, if you were to look through this document, you can tell that this is actually, these are the instructions for the 1040 tax form. Likewise, if you look at this page here, which is coming from a book, we see 65 double-ended queues. Okay, immediately you can tell that this is a book about data structure, what it's discussing. Likewise, here is a summary. So that's the idea behind semantic markup. Again, to provide structure and to focus on marking up content so that it reflects the meaning. So let's take a look at an example of what you're not supposed to do, because again, this is an area where students, even though we talk about it every semester, they tend to make mistakes in. Here's the Black Goose Bistro page again, and notice here, if you remember when we did the markup, we did this as a heading 1, which we ended like so, and then this one was a heading 2, meaning a subheading or a level 2 heading, and the same thing was true for catering, it's a level 2 heading. Okay, and the same thing is true also for location and hours. So one thing you might notice here, you might think, okay, a heading 1 looks a little bit big, and then a heading 2 is slightly smaller, but then maybe you're not interested in this size. Maybe you would like the Black Goose Bistro to appear in the size of a heading 2. So what you do is you take your document, and here it is again, and you take that Black Goose Bistro, the main heading, and you change it into a heading 2. And then you take all 3 subheadings, and instead of being heading 2s, you change them into being heading 3s. So the result, once you do this, we move the page from what we see here to what we see here. So sure enough, we did accomplish what we wanted, which is changing the font size from this to being this, and the same thing is also true for the subheadings being smaller in size. If you do something like this, you just broke the semantics of the page, because Black Goose Bistro is supposed to be the main heading. It's supposed to be a heading 1 to reflect to a machine that's reading your content, and we'll talk about this a couple of slides down. But basically, for machines that are reading your content, they should know that this is the main heading of the page. By changing it to a heading 2, you are modifying the structure and the meaning of this heading to be a subheading, and that's not the case. Here's another example just so that this idea becomes clearer to you. There's this website called CSS Zen Garden, and the people who established it, they had a set HTML that you are not supposed to modify, and then they allowed you to take that HTML and add to it any CSS that you like and any images to make it into any theme you like. So basically, they provided you with the content, they provided you with the structure and the semantics, and they told you don't touch it. You're not supposed to touch that HTML whatsoever, and they made it open to the public. So anyone who wants can take that HTML, not touch it, add any CSS on top of it. So here is an example of one person who took that HTML and changed it into maybe a deep theme. The same page, the same HTML, somebody else took it and they made it into this orchid theme. As you can see here, you can see it here, the font that they applied to subheadings and so on. Continuing, here's a third example, someone who took completely a different theme, applying it to the same content. So the way you can think of this as these mannequins that are dressed differently, and think of the mannequin itself as the HTML. It doesn't change. It's the same one from from here to here to here to here. But then you can dress it up differently, and that would be your CSS. So the idea, we're not focusing on CSS just yet, but the idea here is that when you write HTML, your focus should be on the structure, meaning you should have for this mannequin, arms, and so on. That's going to be the focus when we mark up our content. So you might be wondering, what are the benefits? Why can't I just get away with using a heading 2 for the main heading of my page? There are so many. So one of these would be maintainability. In general, in software engineering, you learn that code, you write it today, but you keep in mind that it's going to be changed tomorrow. Why? Because user requirements change, and what you need is going to be changing, which means the code is being built today, but we keep in mind that it's going to need maintenance tomorrow. So maintainability is an important aspect of software engineering. And this is even more true for websites, because guess what? When a customer comes to you saying, please design for me a website for this particular business, it's going to be that the user themselves is going to ask for changes in the future, but also the viewers will be giving feedback saying, hey, maybe you can add this, maybe you can modify that, either directly to you as a webmaster or through the customer who asks you. So this is even more so the case. When you divide up your content into HTML and CSS, basically having your HTML just responsible for the structure and the semantics of the code, that makes it a lot easier in the future to make changes to it. Another benefit is going to be performance, because this separation is going to result in cleaner code, which means it's going to be shorter, it's going to be faster to download. Think about someone who has vision impairment and who's going to be listening to your page. Can you imagine? They don't want to sit and hear every single thing that's in the page. Maybe they would like a quick summary. So they would like to know that, hey, the main heading is Black Goose Bistro. By you changing it from a heading 1 to a heading 2, you just resulted in manipulation of what the main heading, what the main idea of the page is going to be. So that's going to be very frustrating for someone who's listening to the page. A fourth one is search engine optimization. Remember that when we write HTML, these pages are going to be read by other programs. For example, search engine crawlers. These are programs that continue to scan the web for new pages and index them, so that when someone does a search, they can rank your page, deciding how relevant it is and how high it should be among the hits. When they bring back 1 million hits, they have to come up with an intelligent way to bring to you the most relevant ones. Otherwise, if the page that's most relevant is going to be number 1 million, you will never get there. So that's going to be very important. How can you help these search engine crawlers find your page and give it the way that it deserves? Well, by saying, my heading 1, my main theme of the page is Black Goose Bistro. Well, that keyword bistro, if someone does a search, your page is going to get a higher rank if you have bistro within a heading 1 rather than a heading 2. So this hopefully a very important concept, and I wanted this to be in a video by itself, because again, students, even though they talk about this, they later on go and you ask them, why did you mark this as a heading 2, or why did you mark this as this way or that way? They tell you, because I wanted to, and that's the wrong answer. It doesn't matter how, you never, when you think about the way it looks, you structure it based on its meaning and much more weight. This needs to be a main heading. This is a subheading. This needs to be a paragraph. This needs to be a list of items where the order isn't important. This is going to be something that I'm quoting from somewhere else. That's what you need to be focusing on. You shouldn't be thinking about, I want the font size to be like this. I want this to be bold. I want this to be italicized. These are the wrong questions to be addressing using HTML. These you can address later on by using CSS.